This is the rather eccentric but also very sound Argentinian President Javier Milei. But while we can appreciate some of his bold economic policies, such as taking that chainsaw to useless ministries which he closed down, we must reject his claim to the Falkland Islands. After the Reverend Starmer took the potty decision to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, not only did Commonwealth nations try and indeed succeed in twisting his arm into discussing reparations, but now it seems the decision on the Chagos Islands has emboldened the Argentines, as President Milei has claimed the decision proves there is hope for a diplomatic means of taking territory from the United Kingdom. Well, I'm joined now by a friend of the programme, the historian Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Rafe, thank you very much for coming in. It just opened things up, didn't it? It would have been absolutely extraordinary if Milei hadn't now used this opportunity to say, well, can we have the Falklands, please?
Yes, as many of us predicted, by abandoning the Chagos Islands, Starmer has declared open season on the British overseas territories. I mean, having said that, Milei's a colourful character. A couple of caveats to put it into context. He's an Anglophile, very pro-Thatcher, very pro-Churchill. Also, for an Argentinian politician, to make a claim for the Las Malvinas is akin to a British politician saying that they are committed to an NHS free at the point of service. It's domestic suicide for a politician to say anything unlike that. And so this was done for a domestic audience. But notwithstanding all of that, Labour's ineptitude over the Chagos Islands, its ideological extremism, and its inability, quite frankly, to see Britain's wider national security interest has opened a door for politicians like this to pursue claims they didn't think were possible before. And you're quite right, from Argentina to the Caribbean, world leaders now see Labour as being weak, being inexperienced, and also, importantly, being ideologically sympathetic. And they see senior Labour figures, including our Prime Minister and including our Foreign Secretary, as being decolonisation allies who would happily promote far-left ideology over Britain's national interest and who are ashamed and, quite frankly, embarrassed by Britain's historical legacy. And that's a fundamental weakness which is ripe for exploitation.
OK, but the Prime Minister, to be fair to him, has said, well, his uncle was in the Falklands, almost drowned, survived, and this had a very powerful influence on him, and that all the overseas territories, he is particularly committed to the Falklands. Don't you think on this, if not on anything else, we should take him at his word?
Not at all, because we saw in the immediate backlash against the Chagos Islands, Keir Starmer's instinct was actually not to rule out giving back Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands. It was only latterly that we heard him make this statement.
I'm going to quibble with you on the term giving back.
Oh, so
the Falklands never belonged to Argentina.
Yes, you're quite right. You're absolutely correct on that point, yes, to secure for abandoning British rule of those islands. Remember, Keir Starmer is a man who took the knee to BLM, a man who has taken down portraits of Elizabeth I, of Sir Walter Raleigh, of Gladstone because of their links to slavery, and a man who wasn't quick to defend British sovereignty over the Falkland Islands in the wake of the Chagos Islands. And of course, that's why you saw last week, as you said, at CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, a strong push for reparations, which we didn't see 2 years ago at the last CHOGM in Rwanda under a Conservative government, and is also why Milei feels that he can now make these claims. And he said as much in this Financial Times interview. He said it would be unimaginable that the Tory government would have allowed us to gain the Falkland Islands, but we now see that as a possibility under Labour.
But do you think there might be something to be done with Argentina? Because there's meant to be a great deal of oil around the Falklands, and if relations between the Falklands, the UK and Argentina were better, would it be more easy and advantageous to exploit those resources, and that Milei might be onto something, and perhaps Starmer giving a friendly reception to it could be beneficial for everybody?
If there are economic advantages to be had, I mean, Milei is somebody who's certainly open to all of those sorts of things, but it has to be with an abandonment of its claim to the islands, or at least a willingness to have private negotiations stating, I will bang the drum in public, but in private, of course, there'll be another thing altogether. I think a broader issue is whether the Labour government will have the conviction to actually defend the islands, despite what it says. In 1982, there was a debate as to whether Britain should go to the defence of the Falkland Islands. Had we had another Prime Minister apart from Thatcher, either Tory or Labour, it's questionable whether we would have done that. And I wonder whether a Labour government would actually want to put British forces when we're so deplete of our forces at the current time.
Well, more civil servants than armed forces.
Yes, well, the thing is, we have the ground forces to do it. You know, we scrambled 2 brigades in 1982, including our parachute regiment and the Gurkhas and the Royal Marines, but we don't currently have the logistics to sustain the deployment of those forces, and I think that's a great weakness that we have. We've gone from being, you know, the old Teddy Roosevelt, you know, speak softly and carry a big stick. We're speaking softly and carrying a twig at the moment.
But Milei has been very clear, he would only want to do things diplomatically, so I don't think we need particularly to worry about that. But don't you think that we can sleep easy in our beds, because we know that David Lammy is representing the country on the world stage, and that he is a bold figure who believes clearly in self-determination. And it's inconceivable that he would serve in a government that was going to hand over the Falkland Islands. Man of such stature.
I think that David Mastermind Lammy doesn't quite understand that the role of foreign
Remind me
secretary...
about Mastermind.
Well, his grand appearance on Mastermind when he was asked to discover radium, and he said Marie Antoinette rather than Marie Curie, and that Henry VIII's son was Henry VII. I mean, how do we end this? But I think someone needs to remind him that being foreign secretary doesn't mean you advance foreign interests. The foreign secretary should ultimately advance British interests, and he didn't get that memo at some point.
But the Foreign Office has been advancing foreign interests for decades. It would be quite revolutionary to have a foreign secretary who behaved differently, surely.
Actually, yeah. When he first came to office, I actually said it would be rather good if he stayed the course for the whole 5 years, because things are so bleak, we need some comic relief. But I think his role is actually a bit too serious for him to actually remain in that office for long.
Can I take you back to one thing you said I thought was really important? Milei said he wanted the Falklands in the same way as British politicians say they like the NHS. Isn't a British politician saying he will defend the Falklands in that category? And therefore we should be reassured, because there's no way even a left-wing politician could really give away the Falklands. The backlash domestically would be so strong.
I think when you have a far-left Labour Party, as we see right now, when you see the sort of statements coming out from backbench Labour MPs, when you have a Foreign Secretary who has made clear arguments for reparations, speaking as someone who is Caribbean rather than British, I don't think the certainties of the past can be guaranteed any longer. I think we're in very uncertain territory.
Very uncertain territory. Well, Rafe, thank you very much.